A big tank preview from Games Workshop today, official confirmation on the new stat lines for the Dorn, Russ and Baneblade, a few more details on new weapons, and an interesting scale comparison as to where the Rogal Dorn fits in with its armoured brothers. Hello and welcome back to Warspecs Tactics, where today we're talking tanks. Games Workshop have dropped a fairly interesting preview, confirmed a bunch of things that we knew from the leaks, and a few other bits and bobs. First up, I must admit I was quite interested to see the scale comparison of the tank. They've got both a forward-facing and a top-down view of how the Rogal Dorn fits in compared with the Ross and the Baneblade. It seems to be a pretty solid middle ground, to be honest. It's both a little bit wider and a little bit longer than the Ross, plus a little bit taller as well, but maybe compared with mock-ups that people have been experimenting with online, it maybe doesn't quite dwarf the Ross by as much as I thought it might. The model's profile is kind of interesting from an in-game perspective as well as just scale compared with the other tanks. I feel like having a bit of a bigger profile might be a small negative for this guy. Perhaps just a little bit harder to hide out of line of sight if you need to. Though it does mean that with all the guns concentrated on one big platform, it does mean that it's potentially a little bit easier to get line of sight or range on your opponents for. Say for example, it's usually just going to be a bit easier to get a bead on something with a single tank like a Rogal Dorn, compared with, say, if you're trying to get the same line of sight with two different tanks if you had two Rosses next to each other. Probably not the biggest deal, and the most important thing would be the unit stats and synergies and things, but it is quite cool to see a side-by-side comparison, and I feel like with them ranked up like that, they fit in pretty well. I don't really feel like the Rogal Dorn sticks out particularly. It does look like they've followed quite a lot of Guard design tenets going with that. I'll be interested to hear your guys' thoughts though. As well as that, we do have another shot of them rumbling to war alongside some other guardsmen. It's cool to see a few painted up in an alternate camo scheme, alongside some infantry and the various other guard armoured vehicles. I think that that's the new Cadian kit out the front as well. They're modelling some fancy backpacks there. Looks like there's enough to equip the squad with them if you want to. Moving on to the stats and numbers though, first up we have the stat lines for the Leman Russ battle tank and Rogal Dorn completely confirmed. It does look like the leaks profiles are really quite accurate. These all tally really quite well. Besides, I think that the Leman Russ on the leaks had 5 attacks, not 6, though to be honest that's really quite a minor thing. On top of that, they have also confirmed that the turret weapon rule is indeed in the codex. That one's been rumoured for really quite a long time now. It seems that the turret weapon rule does indeed give the main gun a +1 ballistic skill, so that'll be hitting on 3s whether or not you're a tank commander or a regular Ross. And having a 3+ ballistic skill really is quite nice in current 9th edition, as it'll mean that you're a bit less vulnerable to either degrading or enemy negative modifiers. It is kind of interesting though that a ballistic skill 4+ with a +1 to hit would make you a bit more susceptible to any stacking modifiers. So if you were shooting at a unit that was in dense cover that also had their own -1 to hit special rule, you could be hitting on a 5 again. I'd say those things aren't super common these days though, as for most armies in the game it doesn't make much difference, as you'll usually be capped at just the -1 as per the core rules. Hand in hand, I also think that firing out of melee is a really significant buff, particularly for Rosses. Things like Demolisher Cannons and Battle Cannons have decent enough damage, but one of the main issues with them is that you can get locked up in combat and then you've got a big blast weapon that can't fire into there. So they're one of the few vehicles that you can really ruin by tagging them in melee, whereas things like, say, if you tagged a Contemptor Dreadnought or something, they'd usually just be able to fire their gun straight into melee and at least do some damage. I feel like firing from melee is going to make them into a unit that you could use a lot more aggressively, and if you get tagged by an enemy combat unit then it's not the end of the world. Sure, they might deal a little bit of damage to your decently tough profile, but you can still be happily shooting away at other targets. Finally, as well as confirming those changes, they did say that, as per the leaks as well, they do indeed apply to Hellhounds and Chimeras too. Hellhounds will be firing out of combat, and I guess that's a useful enough buff to things like multi-lasers or turret-mounted heavy bolters on the Chimera side of things. Finally, to get onto the actual stat lines themselves, the Leman Russ gets +1 wounds to 13 wounds, and an extra 3 attacks going all the way up to 6. It does look like it have a reasonable chance of road killing a light infantry with a bad save each turn now. It still keeps its movement value of 10 inches, but as per the changed weapons, it really does like grinding advance is indeed going away. So essentially the Ross is kind of getting a speed boost, as you'll still be able to move 10 inches around the board and still blaze away with maximal firepower. Overall, multiple solid upgrades there. The Rogal Dorn is again as leaked, a 10-inch move hitting on a 4+ at range, strength 8 and toughness 9, 17 wounds, 6 attacks, leadership 8, and a 2+ save. In particular, the toughness 9 is going to give a whole ton of armies headaches. Anything that relies on strength 8 for their anti-tank is really not going to like fighting these, though it is rumoured that they're going to be paying a bit of a points premium for that. And it looks like, compared with the Leman Russ, in terms of durability per point, the Rogal Dorn's actually going to be the same or worse against anything besides strength 8 weapons. I did a bit of math hammer comparing the Russ and the Rogal Dorn on Monday. If you'd like to check that out, I'll link that down in the video description. Otherwise, in terms of profiles, I feel like perhaps the biggest question for the guard tanks is whether or not they'll be able to retain Armour of Contempt or not. I feel like there is at least a reasonable chance that Games Workshop might just say with the boosted toughness profiles, they just make it go away. I'm genuinely really not too sure at this point whether or not they'll keep it. I guess it depends on if they update the balanced data slate at some time around the Guard Codex, and if they decide that it's not needed anymore, it might go for the Guard vehicles. Admittedly, it did stay around for the Chaos vehicles, so I guess we'll have to wait and see on that front. Otherwise, moving onwards, they also gave us a look at the stat lines for the primary weapons of the Dorn and the Russ. The Russ's Battle Cannon new profile and the Rogal Dorn's Oppressor Cannon. The Oppressor Cannon does maybe just look like a bigger and more dangerous version of the same thing, with an auto cannon strapped to the side. The Russ's Battle Cannon is looking massively better to me. D6 plus 3 means that you'll be getting an average of 6.5 shots rather than 7 for double shooting with grinding advance, but at least you get a little bit less swinginess. This one has a minimum of 4 shots rather than 2 for the standard Russ before. Otherwise, going from damage D3 to a flat damage 3 is an enormous boost. It's just going to be massively more threatening against vehicles and 3 wound infantry now. And of course the turret weapon rule hitting on 3s rather than 4s is a big buff as well. The average battle cannon shot will be hitting 4.3 shots now rather than 3.5, so even if you got less shots, more are going to hit. And overall, between that and the extra damage increase, you're getting around about, say, an 85% boost of damage against a toughness 7 vehicle. I believe that the battle cannon averages about 6 wounds against that target now. Very nice, and good to see an iconic weapon get buffed so well. Otherwise, for the Oppressor Cannon, that has kind of a similar stat line, another d6 plus 3 shots, but all the other stats are just a bit better. 90 inches, a strength 10, AP 3, and damage 4. This one really feels a lot more dedicated anti-armor, and this one would average you a 10 wound damage against even a toughness 8 vehicle with a 3+ save, which does look very nice. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be directly superior to the Russ though, as it'll cost more points. Again, I did that comparison video with the Oppressor Cannon versus some anti-tank guns on the speculative Dorn versus Russ comparison I did a couple of days back. I kind of wish that they'd shown off the twin battle cannon profile for the Rogal Dorn as well. The Elite's profile did just look a bit weird, having it around about the same amount of shots as the Ross battle cannon but better AP. Just seems like a bit of a weird way to go with it. I feel like if you'd had more guns, then you would be getting more hits, not extra AP, even if they didn't decide to go down the route of just flatly doubling it. In any case though, broadly looking good for both of these guns. They look big, scary and threatening, very general purpose, and hitting on 3s. Finally, for Games Workshop's previews, we have the Baneblade. No real weapon previews on this one, but what looks like some good news on the raw stats. The tank's gained 4 wounds and toughness 9, so it's almost as hard to take down as 2 Rogal Dorn tanks. That profile really is just spectacularly durable. I feel like you're really starting to get to the point where enemies just might really not want to bother trying to slog through all those wounds. It can be pretty bad if you dedicate all your anti-tank to one target and then you whiff, as opposed to maybe focusing your time and effort going around and killing the smaller support vehicles that you've got a bit more of a guaranteed chance of killing. The other interesting thing that I believe wasn't on the leaks was that apparently Baneblades will now come with a set of sponsons included in the base cost. So that now means that basically every single Baneblade probably should be rocking the 2 las cannons and 4 heavy bolters on the turrets, as if you're passing them up, you're basically passing up free guns for no cost whatsoever. I feel like that's a bit of a strange move, seeing as they've always given you the option to either field them with those sponsons or not before. And they're basically saying now that it's kind of mandatory if you want to field an optimized tank. Whether or not it actually constitutes a buff or not is kind of irrelevant to say without the points cost. You probably need the points cost and weighing this up against the other guard tanks to have any idea as to whether it's strong or weak. In general though, it does seem like it's kind of hard to imagine that it's going to be worse than before. A decent toughness boost, and rumoured to be getting the turret weapon as well, which I kind of see will be unlikely to be left out if things like chimeras are getting it, so potentially a lot more hits on the main gun. That's it for Games Workshop's official previews. I just thought for people who are interested, here are just the leaks profiles for the Rogal Dorn, and then we'll look at the Russ and the Baneblade after. As always with these leaked guard rules that have been coming out over the past week or so, full credit to Morty and Glory for leaking a playtester copy of the codex over on his channel. Thoroughly recommend checking out. In any case, besides the previewed oppressor cannon, as I mentioned, there's the slightly strange twin battle cannon with extra AP. That's what I would be interested to see whether or not that winds up being the actual profile, as it just seems a bit strange. Otherwise, the pulverizer cannon's D6 shots, strength 8, AP minus 2, and damage 3, sort of like a demolisher ranged gun with a battle cannon profile, and the castigated Gatling cannon gives you 12 shots at strength 6 and damage 1. The tank's rumoured to be 250 points, and then you can pay a little bit extra if you want to upgrade to sponsons or those little front-mounted heavy stubbers or melter guns. Overall looks solid enough to me from this. You can put really quite a lot of guns all on one tank if you really want to. Otherwise, here is the Leman Russ battle tank and its mace turret weapon stat lines. Apparently the Russ is going to be 150 points base once you've paid for a hull weapon, and then you've got the choice of all these different profiles here. Again, I talked about these in that Russ vs Dorn video as some math hammer for which ones are looking the best at the moment. The too long didn't read of that though seems to be that the Punisher cannon is as expected best against the light infantry with 1 wound. The battle cannon and the exterminator plasma cannon are really good generalised all-rounders. The exterminator's better but has the chance of dealing mortal wounds to you. And otherwise the Vanquisher and the Demolisher both have advantages for anti-tank. My guess might be that the Executioner plasma cannon might wind up being one of the favourite picks, or potentially the Vanquisher just for the sheer power of ignoring those invuls. It'll be interesting to see what people choose to field. Finally we have the Baneblade, which we did talk through the variants of in a previous video, mainly focused around the Shadow Sword. The elite things all seem to correlate with what Games Workshop has said. Apparently the melee is strength 9, AP minus 2 and damage 2. It comes with those track guards with a +1 save against damage 1 at base, and apparently if you do get the last set of sponsons, it would cost you another 60 points over the base loadout for whatever the tank costs as standard. It seems that at least the main Baneblade cannon might well be just staying the exact same, as 3d6 at strength 9 and damage 3, but it will be significantly more scary on that with the extra turret weapon rule and having it hit a lot more accurately. In any case, a fair bit of interesting stuff there. Let me know what you think of the previewed rules for the 3 guard tanks, and which ones you think might be shaping up to be best when the codex drops. I feel like we might have to do a bit more of a comparison video when the actual codex comes out. In any case, for more like this, feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, where I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming. Looking forward to covering the guard release in detail, both before and after the codex drops. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and that's how I can keep on making quite so many videos like this just about every day. The link's down in the video description if you're interested. Channel patrons do have a few advantages, including seeing videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.